Hi there, this is Miss Cave with a lesson on linear equations, and today we're learning about how to identify slope and y-intercept from an equation and a graph. You have this foldable that you received in class. Our SOL for today and for the next couple of weeks is SOL, Virginia SOL 816, specifically B and C, where we learn about slope and y-intercept. So today in class we took a look at the cookie problem that we started this unit with, and we looked at the difference between the two graphs, and we talked about while there was the same slope, they had a different y-intercept. So what we have here, a linear equation, slope-intercept form is right here. Y equals mx plus b, where m is our slope, so we use the letter m, as we've already learned, to represent slope. And the letter that we use that gives us that starting point for the graph, we represent our y-intercept with the letter b. So using this form, it's very easy to identify both the slope, because it's always the letter that's in front of x, when y is presented by itself on the other side. Whenever you put an equation in this form, you are able to recognize the slope, which is the letter, or excuse me, the number that's in front of the x, the coefficient, and then whatever the constant is, or the number that's being added or subtracted, that's going to be your y-intercept, or at least the y value of your y-intercept. So if we look at this here, this example here, you can see that B is the place that you hit the y. So in this case, our y-intercept, b, would be 0, 1. So if I were to write this as an equation using this format, it would be y equals mx plus 1. That 1 being the place where it hits the y-axis. To find slope, we already know how to do that in a couple of different ways, but one of which is to find our rise over run. So we can take this point here, our y-intercept, and I can take this point here, these 2 points on the line, and I can find my slope value. My rise is going to be 2, my run is 1. So my slope now, instead of just putting m for slope, m is equal to 2 over 1. So my m value is 2. So this would be the equation given this graph, because our slope is what goes in front of our x, and our y-intercept is the y value when x is equal to 0. And looking at a graph, you can get m by making a slope triangle, calculating the rise over the run, or finding the change in y over change in x like we did last week. And then you put that in front of your x value, and then it's easy again with a graph to find your y-intercept, because it's simply the point where it meets 0 on the x, it's the y value. And that's going to be your b value for your linear equation. So in this foldable, we're going to review a little bit more with slope. We're going to go back and review some of the things that we've already learned, and we're also going to learn more about how to identify y-intercept. That's our new concept today. So if we open up our foldable, we'll start with our slope. And our slope is a measure of steepness. So our slope is how steep a line is. And we've learned 4 different types of slope. This was in our last foldable. When we're going up, like this bicycle is here, this is going to be a positive slope. And just here it says read from left to right. So if I look at that line going from left to right, this person's going uphill. So that's going to be a positive slope. This one here, if I read from left to right, is going down. So that's a negative slope. And if you notice here, this one doesn't go up, it doesn't go down, it goes straight across. Do you guys remember what we used for that? 0. That's a 0 slope. And then when we have no slope, it's just straight up and down. It's exactly what I said, it's no slope. And sometimes you see it as undefined. And we can calculate this using rise over run or change in y over change in x, those two different formulas that we've looked at. Okay, so now we're going to go to y-intercept. Now that we reviewed slope, the y-intercept is the point where the line crosses the y-axis. So you can see where the line hits the y. So I've got my y-axis here. And the point where it hits, where it crosses through, that's going to be your y-intercept. We also have x-intercept. You guys will work with x-intercept when you get to algebra next year. But for our class today, or our class this year, we're mainly just learning about y-intercept. After the SOL, we'll probably do some more algebra things, and we'll get into x-intercept and some other systems of equations and things like that to get you guys ready for next year. Okay, so from an equation, if I'm given the equation y equals mxb, here's my equation. B is equal to the y-intercept. So all I do is I look at the equation, and whatever B is, that's your y-intercept. So if I have y equals 3x plus 4, what would be our value for B? 4. So B would be equal to 4. So our y-intercept is actually 0, 4. A lot of times people want to say the y-intercept is just 4, but the most technical, the best way to read the y-intercept is to give the 0, 4. And the other way you can do it from an equation is you can put in 0 for x and see what y would be. You could solve the equation. So if I had a different equation like y equals 2x plus 7, okay, I could enter in x equals 0. So I could put y equals 2 times 0 plus 7, and then go ahead and solve it. 2 times 0 is 0 plus 7, y equals 7. So then our y-intercept here would be 0, 7. So when you're given an equation, you could either identify, if you know that it's the plus b, and the reason it works is because what y is, it's the value of x, or excuse me, what the y-intercept is, the value of y when x is 0. So you've got two different strategies. The first one is the easiest. You're just looking at what's been added or subtracted to your slope and your x variable. And then here, we just plugged in 0 for x. All right, so for this one, the first thing that you need to do when you're trying to identify the y-intercept is you need to make sure the equation is in slope intercept form. That's the y equals mx plus b. That's slope intercept form. It has your slope and it has your y-intercept. It has to have y by itself on the left. So you can change your equations. We're not going to do much of that this year. But if it's not in slope-intercept form, you can solve the equation for y, just like we've solved equations for different variables as we've gone through our multi-step equations. And then once you get it into that form, you're going to find the blank and blank. You're going to find the slope and the y-intercept. Okay, so my slope is 2, my y-intercept is 3. I'm going to plot the y-intercept. I'm just going to abbreviate y-int. I'm going to plot the y-intercept, and then I'm going to apply my slope, which is 2, so it's 2 over 1, to the y-intercept and draw the line. So what we're doing here is we're learning how to make a graph from an equation without making a table. It's a shortcut, okay? A lot of this unit is by learning slope, we have a quicker way to graph lines without making a table and plugging in points, as you guys probably did last year. And I know my Math 7 kids will be doing this year. So what is my y-intercept? Let's go through and try the steps. What's my y-intercept? What's B? 3. So that means my y-intercept is what? 0, 3. Okay. What's my slope? 2. So it's 2 over 1, right? I'm just putting it into that rise over run. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my graph and I'm going to plot my point for my y-intercept, which is 0, 1, 2, 3. So this is my y-intercept. And then I'm going to go ahead and apply my slope. So to get my next point, you know, before you took 2 points and you found the slope, now I'm going to make another point because I know the slope. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up 2 and over 1. So I'm going to take my slope, my 2 is my rise, my 1 is my run. I'm just thinking this. And so I'm going to go up 2, right? That's my rise. And I'm going to go over 1. That's my run. And then I'm going to make my point. Okay. Now, as you can see, if I go up and over here, it's going to be off my graph. So to get another point, instead of going up 2 over 2, I could go back, or down, excuse me, down 2, right? Negative 2, negative 1, which is also a slope of 2. So I'm going to go down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1. You guys see that? Because that's a negative over a negative, which would be a positive slope. Once I get my points, I can connect them to graph my line. So again, we started out with our y-intercept. We plotted our 0, 3, which is this point here. And then using what I knew about slope, that slope was rise over run. So that means the next point would be up 2 over 1. So I took this point, I went up 2 over 1. And then to get the other points, I went down 2. So I want you guys to see that. This is because this is a negative 2 and this is a negative 1. That's also ends up being positive because negative 2 over negative 1 is positive 2. That's still a positive slope even though you're going down because I'm going down and then back. Down and back would actually be a positive slope. It's like when you take away a negative, when we learned about integers, when you take away negatives, it's like you're adding a positive. So it's like a negative divided by negative would be a positive. Okay, that's it for y-intercept. On Monday, we will review the 3 different ways to find slope that we've already talked about today. And that's it for y-intercept and slope.